Good morning. Our opening words for 2023. Pulled in many directions by the demands of our days, we light this chalice to remind us of the still point deep inside. Made unsteady by the winds of unpredictable paths, we light this chalice to remember the shelter of each other, longing for lights that lead us back to our truest selves. We kindle this chalice to illuminate the faces of friends and sacred companions, recalling once again that we find our way through the willingness to take each other's hand. I invite you now to rise and embody your spirit and join in singing When Our Heart is in a Holy Place, number 1008 in your teal hymnal. That's the paperback teal hymnal 1008.
Good morning. I'm Reverend Annie Gonzalez, your acting senior minister, and I welcome you all, whether here or on Zoom, to First Parish in Bedford, a Unitarian Universalist congregation. People have been gathering in this spiritual community for centuries to seek and understand the truth and to love better. You are welcome here with whatever identities, whatever beliefs, whatever feelings and experiences you are bringing today. We're glad you're here. If you are newer, you can fill out a blue connection card that you could find in a pew, or you can use a QR code that you can find in a pew, or if you're on Zoom, you can go to uubedford.org, find newcomers, and contact us. And those are all good ways to get more in touch with our staff and leaders. I have a few announcements this morning. One is that our nursery is staffed. Woohoo! We love that. We've been working on that for a bit, making sure that we are ready to welcome people of all ages, including the tiny ones who may need nursery care, and so this morning it is staffed, and we're glad about that. This afternoon, I want to invite you all to a gallery reception for First Parish artists who have shown work during the last 10 years up in our art gallery. And this event will be from 4 to 6, and there will be music from Dean Groves, and everyone is invited. My last announcement is that there is going to be a cleanup day on Martin Luther King Monday, January 16th. And I mistakenly wrote in the Parishioner that it was hosted by our Interiors Committee, but I was just trying to give them too much extra work. It's not hosted by them, though they have given us some lovely input, so thank you. It is, in fact, hosted by our board and hospitality team, so please come help us spruce up this building, get it looking extra nice, especially because, you know, some ministers may be touring sometime this spring to check us out. Want to look good for them, so come on over from 10 to 2 during that day if that's a day that you have off work, or if you don't work in general and can come. That will be fabulous. And now please rise in body or in spirit for our unison affirmation in English and in Spanish. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor, y ayudarnos los unos a los otros.
Happy New Year, everyone. Our story today is from a collection of stories called Kindness, A Treasury of Buddhist Wisdom. It's by Sarah Conover and Valerie Wall. It's a great collection of stories if you are somebody who enjoys stories inspired by or traditionally of Buddhist wisdom, and it's available from the UUA bookstore. And I also think I have like 2 copies, so if you want to borrow one, I probably can lend one out. So, Bankei was a famous Zen teacher in Japan long ago. Students from all over came to his monastery for months of study and meditation. To make it through such intensive training is not an easy thing. There's much hard work to be done, many hours of meditation, little sleep, and only small spare meals. Once, during the time at the monastery, a student found that all he could meditate on was his empty stomach. It was also all that he thought about during work and all he thought about even when he was eating. Finally, he could not stand it a day longer, and in the night, ever so quietly, he sneaked into the kitchen, hoping to make off with something tasty and filling. But the head cook, always alert, even when asleep, awoke and caught him. The next morning, the matter was brought before Bankei in hopes that the student would be forced to leave. However, much to the group's dismay, Bankei thanked them for the information and acted as if nothing had happened. Just a few days later, the same pupil was caught stealing food from the kitchen again. The students were even angrier. It was in the middle of the night when the thief was apprehended, but they wrote a petition right then and there to their teacher, Bankei. They each vowed that they would leave the monastery the next day if the thief was not expelled. When Bankei read the petition the next morning, he sighed. He went outside to the monastery gardens and paced thoughtfully. At last, he asked that all the monks and students, including the thief, be brought together. He gathered them in the temple hall, and they became quiet when Bankei entered. "Many of you have come from far away to be here," announced Bankei. "Your hard work and perseverance are to be praised. You are excellent, dedicated students. You have also clearly demonstrated that you know wrong from right. If you wish, you may leave this monastery and find another teacher, but I must tell you that the thief will remain, even if he is my only student." The students were appalled. A murmur of discontent hummed about the room. How could their teacher ask them to leave? Who had done the wrong thing? Only the thief. Feeling anger of the other students, the thief in their midst hung his head in disgrace. Bankei continued, "My friends, this thief does not understand the difference between right and wrong as you do. If he leaves, how will those things be learned? He needs to stay here so he can also understand." When the thief heard these words, he felt profoundly moved. Tears sprung to his eyes, but even though his shame in front of the others, he still could feel Bankei's deep compassion. He knew he would not steal anymore. Bankei ended his speech. He left the hall, leaving the students to make their individual decisions. The thief immediately took a spot on a meditation bench and set about to meditating. Many of the students stood right up to leave the monastery. Somewhat confused by Bankei's speech, they discussed among themselves, all except for the presence of one student, the thief. The great hall emptied for a time. When Bankei returned an hour later, it was so quiet, he assumed all the students had left, just as they had vowed. But much to his surprise, every last student had returned. All were quietly sitting, composed in meditation, and the wise and kind Bankei smiled at such a wonderful sight. Thank you all so much for listening this morning. I invite our pre-K to 7th grade to depart along with their teachers. Just as a reminder, pre-K to 5th grade is in the common room, and 6th, 7th grade is upstairs in room 204.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lori Groves. I'm a member of the Lay Pastoral Care Team. And this is the time in our service where we joys and concerns from the congregation. We ask that you keep your comments relatively brief. And I want to light one last candle. I said that before, but I'm saying it again. For all the joys and concerns that we all hold in our hearts. And I also want to say that I will be at the candle stand at the end of the service if anybody would like to light a candle in private.
This has been a time of what seems to be an incredible amount of loss and illness and challenge in our congregation. And while we have so much to be grateful for and exciting energy around ministerial candidates, there's also a lot that is heavy and hard. And so I wanted to offer a song this morning that I find as a helpful kind of meditation to hold when things feel like too much. It's a song that I learned from some friends. It was written by a Jewish songwriter named Ali Halpert. And one of my friends sang it to his father when his father died. And so I think it is a sacred song in that way. It has two parts, and I'll teach them to you, and then we can fold them together, but because they are parts that fit together. Can you give me a starting pitch? Thank you. Loosen, loosen, baby. You don't have to carry the weight of the world in your muscles and bones. Let go, let go, let go. That's the first part. It's loosen, loosen, baby. You don't have to carry the weight of the world in your muscles and bones. Let go, let go, let go. And there are words in your order of service. Let's sing that through a couple times together. Loosen, loosen, baby. You don't have to carry now we're going to try to put it together. We'll see how it goes. Either way, sing what comes to you to find that place to let go. That's the most important thing. But I will invite this general side and anyone on Zoom, though we won't hear you, but we'll hear you in spirit, to sing the loosen part. And we'll start with that. And then we'll fold in the holy breath, holy name part. And we'll sing it through a few times together. Loosen, loosen, baby. You don't have to carry the weight of the world in your muscles and bones. Let go, let go, let go. Holy breath and holy name. Will you ease this pain? Holy breath and holy name. Will you ease this pain? Loosen, loosen, baby. You don't have to carry the weight of the world in your muscles and bones. Let go, let go, let go. May we let go what we can. Our offering this morning, being the first Sunday of the month, is a Share the Plate offering, where we split what we collect with an organization that matches our UU values. And appropriately, for all the care that we can see we all need in community, we are sharing with Neighbor Brigade, and Marge Heckman will tell us a little bit more about the Neighbor Brigade.
Good morning. So many of you who live in Bedford, at least, probably have heard of the Neighbor Brigade or are also volunteers for the Neighbor Brigade. It's an organization that was started, I think, about 10 years ago by a woman who saw a need in her community for someone who was in crisis. And it has spread to quite a number of communities in our region, including Bedford. It's a wonderful organization, and basically they provide care in moments of crisis, whether it be rides to appointments, meals, walking someone's dog, maybe helping with household chores. It's been a wonderful opportunity as a volunteer to feel like you can make a difference in somebody's life. So today we are going to give half of our plate collection to the Neighbor Brigade organization as a whole, which also supports the Bedford organization. So please give generously, and we are grateful for your help. Thank you.
Thank you for all you give to this community, both in the form of the offering and in so many other forms. On New Year's Eve, I got a phone call that made me immediately wince and flip my phone over and set it down. I didn't want to answer that call particularly, and I didn't. The call was from a woman who I'll call, in the sake of this story, S. And S was someone I met in late 2017, when the organization that came to be known as the Boston Immigration Justice Accompaniment Network was just getting started. And before we had any of the systems figured out that we now have, like phone numbers that are answered by volunteers who have protocols and instructions and systems for how we handle different requests for support, we were really just an informal network of people connecting with people who needed help, either getting out of immigration jail or dealing with a deportation case. We functioned a little bit like what people call a family-size church. Some of you may be quite familiar with church size theory about how congregations function differently when they are small and more like a family, and then when they get a little bigger and they call it a pastoral-sized church, and then they get bigger than that and it's a program-sized church. And there's different ways that people interact, get needs met, and as you get bigger, if it's going well, you'll create more and more systems. But the little family-sized church, everybody just kind of shows up and tries to help people out how they can. And that's how we certainly were at the beginning. And so I found myself in informal, supportive relationship with this woman, S. And we became fairly close over time. And what I came to understand after not too long was that her life was a series of incredibly challenging crises with not a lot of clear solutions. She was up against a lot. She was dealing with poverty and racism and patriarchy and past abuse and medical crises and mental illness. I could go on. She would often call me in crisis and frantically ask if I could help her. And help her usually looked like some kind of financial support. And at first, I did, often. I even helped her move down to another state in the South, where she assured me that her family who lived down there would be able to support her and help her get the medical and mental health care she needed. And that lasted for a while, until there was a big fight and a falling out with that family, and then here she was back in Massachusetts. After a while, I began to have this internal fight within myself. It was like a wake-up call. Good timing. But I did. I had this internal escalation within myself of feeling resentful and angry toward her. Why did she keep making bad choices? Why did she keep losing her jobs? Why couldn't she just X or Y or Z? And then another part of me that felt really guilty. Because I had so many things that she didn't have, probably would never have. Things that I take for granted, like a bank account. And so how could I, who had everything I needed and then some, deny her things that she really did need? And that's the thing, is these crises were real. They were often due to some of her own poor choices, but they weren't made up. Eventually, hesitatingly and with lots of input from friends and things like this, I got to a place of compassion, of getting grounded and centered in compassion. Now, Pema Chodron, who is a Buddhist nun, says compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. Compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. That part was important. Because I was functioning in a story of I have, she doesn't have, she needs, I help. I'm the helper, she's the helpee. And it was a power dynamic with a lot of guilt and resentment. But when I found my way, circuitously and after much time, into compassion, I could see us as two human beings. Yes, in incredibly different life circumstances, both humans, genuinely trying to make our way in a really screwed up world. Out of that place of compassion, I could move out of blaming her for her bad choices and also out of my own guilt, and I could set healthy boundaries, which I finally did, and it was not easy. At first, me saying, I'm not going to send you any more money at all for anything, was not met with anger. She said, oh, okay, I understand. And actually, she usually coupled every request for money with, and this will be the last time. And I think she really meant it. But she just kept calling to request. And I kept saying, I'm not doing that anymore. I really did mean it. And she kept saying, oh, okay, I understand. And then calling again with the next crisis. But eventually, that started to die down. Setting boundaries is really hard. It's a hard thing to do, whether it's with someone we've been supporting or with some loved one who's much closer in, like a family member or friend. And so I'm going to put in a little plug here for an adult faith development opportunity. On some Wednesday evenings in February and March, I'm going to be facilitating some space on Zoom where we can practice things like setting boundaries, giving feedback, hearing feedback, and even talk about how we do these things on the internet, which is tricky. And it is so helpful when we can do these types of communication from that centered place of compassion. It's not always an easy thing to access because so often we do have what I call internal escalation, multiple voices or feelings competing within us, sometimes blaming others and ourselves, sometimes being sad and happy, angry and guilty, some kind of push against each other that keeps going. And the type of therapy that I do in my personal life, and that I've mentioned here before, is called internal family systems. And it deals precisely with these parts of ourselves that tend to get into internal squabbles or lead us in less helpful behaviors. And in this mode of therapy, there's a concept of a self. And the self has many attributes, including curiosity and calmness and compassion. The idea is that when we can access and be what they call in self, then we can interact with our parts, these parts of us that may be angry or resentful or insecure or fearful or what have you, and that may be leading us into unhealthy stories and behaviors. We can engage with those parts of us from a place of care and compassion. And instead of pushing, we can get to know them and find out what they're about and why they're acting that way and what they need. I don't believe in these concepts literally. though I think perhaps my therapist might. She seems like a true believer. I find instead that it's a really helpful metaphor for what goes on in a human being. Kind of like how I think the word God is a nice metaphor for what goes on in the universe. Not because I think there's a literal God being out there pulling strings or causing things, but because I do think there's some powerful love, life force that moves life towards diversity and thriving, that moves us toward one another. And God is a convenient shorthand. It doesn't work for everyone. Your mileage may vary. And I think that self is a convenient shorthand for being centered in a calm, curious compassion, and that parts are a useful shorthand for the fact that there's a lot going on in us, a lot of different reactions we have that come from different parts of our lives, different cultural patterns we've learned, different things we picked up from our families. And so I like to use this mode. I've found it incredibly helpful in my own life and helpful in extending compassion to others when I think about, some part of them is driving this right now, some part of them that's doing its best. As Jay Early, one practitioner of IFS, says, no matter how much pain or dysfunction you have to deal with in your life, every part of your psyche is doing its best to help you. And I find that compassion rests in that reminder, that whether it's a part of us or someone else, people are trying to do their best, get their needs met, protect wounded parts of themselves. We have such good intentions, despite the very wide-ranging impacts. Now, internal family systems is a mode that must be practiced. And what I mean is not just the sessions where we have guided meditations of getting into self and meeting parts, but also that I'm supposed to practice on my own time. My therapist will instruct me to spend a few minutes, get into self, and go check in on one of those parts we just worked with, as if they're a friend I have to send a check-in text to see how they're doing after a conversation. But whether we practice in a therapeutic mode or a meditation mode, or some other way that we access that compassionate, grounded part of ourselves, we know that it's helpful to practice getting into it. And whether it's on the yoga mat or on the bicycle path, or in the quiet solitude of some special space, maybe here in church, listening to the music, it's good to have ways that we practice. And so I'm going to pitch one more thing, which is that with Randy Currier, who's on the Adult Faith Development Subcommittee, I'm planning a new series of evening, very brief worship gatherings that we're calling Vespers services. And they will have some silence and some song and some ritual and some sharing. And the first one will be on Wednesday, January 25th. We're planning to try to have them monthly as a place to come and practice some of that centering. To go back to New Year's, the next day, I got another text following up from S saying, I need to talk to you, but I'm not going to ask you for money. She finally sort of got the boundary. I called her to see what was going on, and sure enough, it was another crisis, another lost job, a rent check that wouldn't be able to be met. She asked if I could maybe help by applying for a mini grant to help her with her rent and her cell phone bill, something that I had done once before. And I said, yes, I'm happy to apply for the grant. I can't promise it will happen, but I can apply. I filled out the very easy online application, and sure enough, the funding folks said, yes, we'll pay those bills, and they paid them directly. She was incredibly grateful and sent me a text just yesterday asking, and how's my little blondie, which is how she refers to Moira. It's not a happy ending, really, because while she has a new job and she got that need met, there will be another crisis. I can't do anything to prevent that. I can't do anything to fix her life. I can't do anything about the fact that it really is unfair, that there's so much suffering that comes to us that isn't fair, that life, the way it's sorted, has a million types of injustice, of the systemic, human-created kind and of the natural, it-just-happened kind. And yet, here we are. And I think the best we can do is to keep showing up for ourselves and one another with healthy boundaries and with good care centered in compassion. This is what we can practice. And so in closing, I want to invite you into a practice. It's one I've taught here before, and it may be new to you or not. And it's what we call a body prayer. It's a series of postures that are sort of meditative. And the last two focus on compassion. So I'm going to get my microphone back so I can come and be in front of this pulpit. So you can do these postures seated or standing. I'm going to run through them and explain them, and then we'll do them together 3 times in silence. So the first posture is one of gratitude. And put your arms up. Because there's always something to be grateful for. The sunshine, a good friend, something. So we're grateful. The second posture is for humility, and it's a prayer hands posture. And it's to remember that we are finite, limited beings, that we are only capable of so much, and to be with that, to be with our limitations with care. The third posture is offering compassion outwards. And you can think of a specific person or group of people or a place that you send that compassion to. We can see from our candle stand that there are plenty of people who need it. And then the last posture is bringing that compassion into ourselves. Because we need and deserve it too. We'll practice together in silence. May it be so. And just as you were sitting down, I'm going to invite you to rise in body or in spirit and join in our closing hymn. It's a short and sweet one called How Could Anyone? A compassionate and loving song that is very popular in our UU youth communities, but I think is a beautiful song for all ages. Let us meet this world with its unfairness and suffering and its unexpected delights and connections. Let us meet it as much as we can, centered in compassion. Thank you.